The long and short of it is that Roy Campbell taught his sons and daughter, one is my sister's a doctor, the work ethic, how to be fair, and to make sure that you make purchases that have value. That's the long and short of it. So those are the values that I learned from my father.
One of the things I would like for you to speak to on camera is a prediction you made as far back as 1972 in terms of what would happen to the culture that we, for good or bad, are a part of.
You mean black?
Yeah.
Black culture?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Now, I said earlier that I was a student of history, but I was also studying some of the other social sciences, demography and the like. And it was at a time when we pretty much thought we were free. We had, to some extent, integrated into the universities, integrated into the job market. It was a time when we were celebrating our roots, if you recall, Alex Haley and the whole Roots series. So blacks started getting into genealogy. You saw an upsurge in family reunions, and during that very period in the around 74-ish, Bob and I, we would talk about the state of black America, and I said, actually, we're on a downcline. And I think Bob would ask me why, and I said, I'm looking at the makeup of the black family. Increasingly, I'm seeing fewer married couples. I'm seeing more out of wedlock. And over time, that number has gone from the mid 25% in the mid 60s of out of wedlock. So 70+% of black couples were married until it reached almost 70% of our children are born out of wedlock over several decades. And so we wonder why such a large percentage of our males are incarcerated. They don't have the model. Remember, I started out talking about my father. I got my values from my father, not my mother. But when you don't have that strong moral compass in your household, and that's one of the roles of a male and a father in the household, is the moral authority to set goals and have a vision and to go out and work and bring home the bacon. When you don't see that, then you see the streets. So we've had a huge breakdown, and one of my concerns over the course of, again, several decades, I'm not sure if we can recover. And I know that's pretty inflammatory, but I'm not sure if we can recover unless we go back to the future.
Now, while in college, you became a person in my life that was unequivocal, and I avoided being around you because of that for a long time. And it also became the foundation of how I define friendship as well as manhood. In your present occupation as an administrator for the city of Nashville, what is it that you do that is still consistent with the values that you just spoke about?
First of all, I work in public health, and I work in an area called policy, systems, environmental change. Rather than having a lot of programs about educating people about not smoking and eating healthy, what we do is we go to organizations, whether they be employers, youth organizations. I mean, this is what I do every day. And we encourage them to adopt policy. If the organization adopts policy that says no smoking on campus and enforces it, then that goes much further than everybody knows it's not good for you. But that doesn't mean you're not going to do it. So like seatbelt, if you didn't get a ticket, you wouldn't fasten that seatbelt. Well, the same is true with policy. So we're asking organizations, one of my jobs is to work with organizations, employers, metro departments, youth organizations, to share with them the adoption of how to write policy, adopt policy, and enforce policy. That way, it's a default. When a person comes into your domain, then they have to follow your rules. Whether that's eating, now you can bring your own food in, but any organization-sponsored function, you will eat according to that policy. Well, that's consistent with asking people basically to do the right thing for their own self-interest. Period. It's just at an organizational level.
Now, there's been periods of, from a spectator perspective, where you have, by choice, isolated yourself from the mainstream.
Sometimes.
Why?
A variety of reasons. If I'm going through hardship, for example, during the course of my adult life, I've striven out there and reached out there and to become an entrepreneur and failed. Well, rather than being out there, it's better to bring myself in, think through, okay, what'd you do wrong? How do you correct it? And a lot of times people will do a lot of talking, but they're not available to assist you, so I'm not even going to bother. I have gone through some periods of what one might call self-isolation because I was rebuilding my strength, period. Once I was ready to move on, then I'll come back out. But I don't want people gawking at me. I don't want people pitying me. And if you're not in a position to assist me at that time, and I'm not angry at that time, I don't need your presence. That's a little cold, but that's how I function.
In the early days out here, it's fairly Spartan.
Very.
Take me through the regimen of a day back then.
I've always dreamed of owning a farm just like my dad. So I had cows and dogs and that sort of thing. I burned wood. In fact, I would chop wood and burn wood to stay warm, and kerosene. That was it. This was a much smaller farmhouse. It's twice the size that it was, but there was something hearty and pure about chopping your own firewood and sometimes cooking over a Franklin stove. And I did that for well over a decade. And I would say it helped me gain inner strength of being self-sufficient when I didn't have as much money.
Now, you had an accident where you broke, was it your right arm or
broke
your
my
left
left,
arm?
broke this arm here. And that was during a period when I was still splitting wood with, if people are not familiar with an axe maul, it is a sledgehammer with an axe point on the other side. It's quite heavy, but because I had built up the muscle memory, I could still take an axe maul, which is the equivalent of a sledgehammer, and split wood. And I think Bobby was out here once. When he came out, he almost froze to death, by the way. He wasn't used to the element. I was. When I would get home from work in the winter, I had to start a fire like they did 100 years ago. But at that time, I had a broken arm, so I would take the axe maul, split wood, gather it up, pick up the kindling. Folks don't know much about kindling anymore. Those little slivers.
Yeah, we
of
know.
wood.
Yeah.
That's what you use to keep the fire going. And I would make a fire, and in 5 to 10 minutes, the fire was going because it was a Franklin stove, and I had a ceiling fan. In 15 minutes, the house was warm. Period. So I lived that way for more than a decade, and I contend it made me more self-reliant and stronger.
Now, you also had to deal with a social/domestic challenge in your first marriage. From a man's perspective, recount that in terms of how you process that.
That's pretty simple. Remember, I modeled after my father, and of course, they stayed married until death do thee part. He actually passed, but I had a young woman, a very bright person, going to Georgetown. Well, first it went to school in D.C. I'm trying to remember the name, but eventually went on to Georgetown Law School, pretty prestigious. We worked very hard to make sure that she interned at the top law firms, because her first year she interned with a black lawyer, and that's fine, but he didn't always have work, and then he didn't always pay on time. I said, the next year, we're going, since you're at Georgetown, prestigious school, we're going to apply for internships at the big law firms. So we targeted the top 4 law firms in town. She got a job with one of them. I mean, got an intern. She interned. She did a good job. I think it was the summer of 83. No, summer of 86. So they offered her a job. So in 87, she had a job. At that time, that's what, almost 30 years ago, to give you an offer of 50,000 was equivalent of 100,000 today.
At least that much.
Yeah, and at that time, and we had just bought this. I promised we'd buy a home by the time you finish law school. But things had changed. I grew up, even though my mom always had equality, Dad always wore the pants. Whether you are a lawyer, a physician, Vice President of the United States, I'm still going to be the man and head of the household. That doesn't mean that you don't have a role, an equal role, but you won't call all the shots. And so we had quite a bit of conflict, and my only deal was, since we don't have any children, and I've gotten you through law school, sign the deed over. I won't ask for alimony, and it's over. That's essentially it. I mean, there's more histrionics behind that, but essentially, that was the deal. You take a walk, leave my dream, and we're fine. And so I'm here 20 years later, loving it.
That part of you, quite frankly, is a great piece of this project, Real Men Don't Play. I model much of what I define men as, quite frankly, between you and Jim Brown. Although y'all never met each other.
Yeah. But I've always admired him, of course.
Yeah. And can you see the parallel between them cats?
Big time.
See, he's met Jim.
Yeah, okay. I've
Okay.
always admired Jim.
Yeah. What you say, Peter?
In fact, I take up, to this day, I take up for Jim. People tell me the greatest football player ever. I said, please. It's just one. Jim Brown. No, but what about, I said, please. Nobody was as fast, as nimble, as smart, and as tough as Jim Brown. Bring up Earl Campbell. Well, Earl had some of his traits, but Earl was a battering ram. And look at him now, it's unfortunate. I watched him in college because I was at the University of Texas in graduate school when he won the Heisman. So I would watch him every Saturday when they played in Austin. I was fascinated by him, and he reminded me of Jim. But I noticed that he would seek out contact, and when I watched Jim as a kid, Jim, if he could avoid you with those nifty feet, would, and then straight down the sideline. If he had to knock Sam Huff out, he would. But he only did it, to me, from my perspective, he only made contact when he had to.
What are the parallels between your athletic career and your professional career?
You just keep trying hard. I've never been gifted with a superior brain, although I'm intelligent. I've never been gifted with superior athletic prowess or body, but I'm physically capable. And so I played hard as an athlete and continued to play ball, still play ball now. And when I go to work, I work hard. Simple as that. You try. You give your best shot, period. So it's a parallel. It's the same.
Are there any dissimilarities between the approach of an athlete and a professional?
For me, I've used athletics to shape how I approach work, even teamwork. There are times I'm working in units where it's very clear people are not used to working together because they're competing against each other. And my position is, as a unit, we are competing to provide that best product or service. We're not competing against each other. And if we do well, ultimately, we'll all be rewarded. But if we start competing each other, then we'll have strife. And just like a team, once they start getting upset with each other and trying to outdo each other, you get out of rhythm. And so the product is not the same, and you're not losing. So I see some parallels. I don't see any dissimilarities between work and teamwork.
Now, at this phase of your life, What are your objectives over the next 10 or 15 years?
Next 10 or 15 years, one, the very first one is to be healthy. Literally, to be healthy. The next one is to be prosperous. So, to be prosperous and healthy. Those are my goals. Now, what am I doing to achieve that? One, this place. I'm putting enough resource in it, in a very nice place, area anyway, for it to hold its value. And as I refinance, it continues to hold its value. Ultimately, when I retire, probably exactly 5 years, I'll be 65. I plan to take some of those proceeds. We're going to go back to the city, as I stated earlier, but maybe 120, 150,000. It's not a whole lot of money, but it's skin. Part of the proceeds are going to be used as an investment towards actually revitalizing an area called Jefferson Street. Jefferson, if you know anything about Nashville historically, you have three historic black universities. You had TSU previously, Tennessee A&I, Agriculture and Industrial. That's the old TSU. You have Fisk University, and you have Meharry. What I find interesting is that through that whole corridor, mile and a half corridor, it's run down, and I don't quite understand with all the intelligentsia, the professors, the administrators that work in those institutions, why are they not making investments back into Jefferson Street? Because if you go to any city in this country where there's a major white university, it's always aligned with a boulevard. And so I have an idea called the Boulevard Project, buying up not just a parcel or two, but whole blocks of land, bringing on investors, of course, hopefully black investors who have made similar sacrifices with their money, so we can attract other capital. I mean, we're just playing the game. What I find interesting, I think what disturbs me is that we have not played the capital game. That's disturbing to me, that those who have the resources, those being black, have not invested and created opportunities for themselves and people like them. And thus when we look at the unemployment rate, and we look at all the other disadvantages, many of which, and this is controversial too, are self-inflicted. You see our situation, it's dismal. And as I think about national politics, Barack can't get us out of this because we're not self-improving. If we were self-improving, then he could step up. But then if you look at this election, I'm concerned about the number of black folk, young black folk in particular, who will actually go out and vote. So if you're not trying to help yourself, I mean, please. I know I wrapped a whole lot of things up in there.
Well, they all speak to the general question. What's your legacy, David?
This place will probably be my legacy. Just simple. Just being honest, fair like my dad, living a good life, living a little more prosperous than he was, because I'm very educated and I have access to more income, but otherwise just living a decent life and being fair.
Now, do you consider yourself of the three possibilities here, a pacifist, a negotiator, or a gladiator?
None of the above and all of the above. and now the reason why I say that, if you're a student of the art of war, the best warriors don't fight, but they still win battles. Sometimes you finesse it if you don't have to shed any blood, either yours or your opponent's. Sometimes you have to be a gladiator, I think it's called, on the killing field. Sometimes two armies are opposed to one another and they have to fight. So you have to fight, but if you fight, you have to win. I think, did you say pacifist?
Pacifist,
No,
negotiator,
I
gladiator.
don't ever recall being a pacifist, and it's not because I'm bravado. It's just that, to me, the laws of nature, when you back down, you get chased. Pure and simple. So if we have to fight, we have to fight. But I'm not a pacifist, and that's not to say I'm a bad guy, a tough guy. I'm just not a pacifist. Never have been. Don't expect to be.
I got you, man. As we close this interview, I would like for you to once again, and this is a frame that will be, edited in that way, to say, "Hi, I'm David Campbell, and real men don't play."
Hello, I'm David Campbell, and real men don't play.
See, I didn't have to coach him. I knew that.